Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Gagnon Atelier and the Modern Masters podcast. I'm your old pal, Tim Gagnon, and today I am so excited. You have no idea. I have got my friend Ricky I'm going to try to pronounce his name right. Ricky Mujica. I think I got that right. I probably butchered it bad. He's going to correct us because his name is just as hard to pronounce as mine. But we are going to be talking with him about his art career, about his not only his art, but some of the ways that he found a way to make a living as an artist early in his career, and how that's transitioned to the way he makes his living now as a fine artist. And so that's one of the things I'm really excited to talk about him with, and for you guys to glean from. But also we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to his heart, which is going solvent-free as an oil painter. A lot of oil painters run into some problems because we use solvents which are toxic. You know, they anything that says harmful or fatal if swallowed, or it says things like, vapors can kill you quickly, things like that. When you're oil painting, that's what the solvents, all the labels say that, and it's not good for you. So he has decided to go solvent-free, and that's really exciting. So we're going to talk to him about what made him make that decision, how that transition has affected his art, how it's affected how he works, all those things. I think you guys are going to love it. I'm really excited for what we're about to see here. And so with that said, I'm going to bring him on here, and hopefully this will work. I'm going to turn the solo off. I'm going to hide that, and there you are. Ricky, thanks for being here today. And tell me how to say your name right again.
It's Mujica.
Mujica. Yeah. I totally botched that, my man. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're not the first one.
I know. I feel your pain. I get called Gagnon, Banjo, Gagnon, everything in the world. So I understand. Oh man. So that is obviously, what is that? Spanish?
It's it's Cuban, I believe.
It's Cuban, okay.
Because my father was Cuban and my mother is Dominican, so I'm Hispanic. But I never met my father, so
okay.
I don't have ties with the Cuban side that much, but it's a Cuban name.
There you go. Nice. Well, welcome to the Modern Masters podcast, and we're glad to have you here. I've been following your work for a really, really long time, and I got to be honest, I was a little geeking out today. I was excited because, like I said, you're one of those artists that makes me go, man, I need to step up my game. It's just, one of those things. I really get excited looking at your artwork, and every time I see it in a magazine or I see it on Facebook, something like that, I'm like, it just makes me, I'm a firm believer in iron sharpens iron, and to be around artists that make you sharper and want to get better and push you and things like that. So I always get very, very excited to be around artists like you. And the first time I saw you was at the Portrait Society of America in Atlanta. It was the first time I went, and you were sitting in the chair getting painted. You were smiling like
I was
big. Was that you were working?
I was posing. It was funny because the previous year I did the face-off. I was one of the people painting, but I was much more nervous posing. I was painting because I was afraid I was going to fall asleep on there.
Oh my gosh!
The chair, or I was afraid I would move, and I had Susan Lyon, whose work I love, was drawing me on one side, and I had what's his name? He does the still lives here. Famous guy, I can't remember his name. Was painting me on the side, and another famous person was in front of me, and it was, I was nervous.
Yeah, I bet. I can see that. It can be, like my wife, she poses for my classes all the time, and she's like, I don't like posing for your classes, because she's always like, her eyes start to go like this, and she falls asleep. So
that's what I was afraid was going to happen to me. I had to do jumping jacks in between each pose.
I can see that. It happens to the best of us. It's like, I usually get my daughters to pose because they got more energy. They could stay awake, but all my daughters moved away. So now I've been hiring people and asking my friends, like, can you pose for me? Can you pose for me? And things like that. So they do it. But yeah, my wife, she's like my last resort person.
Well, my daughter, used to be a free model, but now it costs me whenever she poses.
Aha, that's a smart
She's
girl.
she's a teenager now. So whenever she needs money, she comes over and says, "Hey, Dad, do you need anybody to pose for you?"
There you go. There you go. That's a good idea. You got to pay her good too. You can't pay her a little bit. You got to pay her good.
I know. I end up having to pay her more than a regular model.
There you go. There you go. Well,
When it used to be so cheap. Free.
That's funny. That's really cool. So let's talk about early in your career. Like, how did you get started? Where'd you go to school? Things like that. Like, every artist says, I was an artist my whole life, but sometimes they surprise us and say they weren't. How did you get started in the art field?
Well, I had a funny. I got really lucky in high school. My high school art teacher, the teacher for my homeroom class in high school was Max Ginsberg.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, he was he was teaching in public school at the High School of Art and Design, and he was my high school art teacher. And I had a friend of mine. He became my best friend in high school. His name was Mark Texera, and he's become a very famous comic artist over the years. But he was amazing. Like even in 10th grade, he was already like in Stan Lee's sites, and he was drawing comics for Stan Lee. And one day he says, "Hey, you should go to the morning group and come paint with us." And what had happened, what there was a morning group where the kids would come into school, and we'd get there like at 5:30 in the morning, and the janitor would come and open up the door at 6 o'clock, and we'd paint. We'd paint each other until school started at 8:30, and it was every morning. And when the first time I came, Max was the teacher there, and his best friend was Erwin Greenberg, who was an amazing teacher. Was there. Stephen Assel, Costa Vavallakas were upperclassmen. They were in the group. You had Garen Baker was in the group as well, and a couple of other people, and William Lowe. And we'd paint every day, and I never missed a day, and it was a wonderful thing. And there was no credit for this. The students didn't get any credits. The teachers didn't get paid. Max didn't get paid. They just did it out of love, and they'd paint with us. And then every once in a while, when Max would have trouble with his painting, he'd go around and teach and help everybody, and then go back and sit down and work on his painting. And
wow. That's incredible. I mean, golly, to have him as your high school teacher, man. That's
my high school teacher. And so it was amazing. And then in my senior year, we did these murals. He grabbed a bunch of us from the morning class and had an after school little thing where we just worked on these murals from life. Each of us had a panel, a 4-foot by 4-foot panel, and we worked on them from life. And I did a paint. My painting was of the mural class.
Oh, neat.
Because it was easy to get the people to pose.
All right,
they were already in the group.
Nice.
I learned a lot, and everybody that had gone to the morning group, and everybody in the mural class all got college scholarships. We all got full scholarships.
Oh wow!
Everywhere, and so I went to Parsons. I was still, youth is wasted on the young.
Mm-hmm.
I got a half scholarship to Yale.
Oh, really?
To Yale Art School, but I didn't do it because it was half scholarship. I'm like thinking, I don't want to have any money, and Parsons offered me like not only a full scholarship, but they gave me extra money.
Oh yeah, well, that's
you know what I mean.
At that point, yeah.
And Pratt and Cooper, but I didn't realize that. One of the things that I didn't know that I know better now is that the school that you go to is important. Because it's not just what you learn at the school; it's the people around you that you're in class with, right?
Right.
And so when I first got out of Parsons, a lot of my first assignments, I decided, after the first year, after the part of the second year, I I was originally going to be a fine arts major. But then when I realized that we weren't going to do that much stuff with the figure, and you know, um, I switched to illustration so that I can get real painting from life, because you get to paint from life and draw from life for the whole time. So I did illustration, and a lot of the early jobs that I got, the assignments in illustration, were because other Parsons students who knew me were now working for art directors and working in publishing companies, and that was my foot in the door. Now imagine Yale is that on steroids.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the people who are your classmen, they are they're world shakers. They're going to be running Marlboro galleries, and
Right. That's true. That's true. I always tell people that relationships are the highest form of currency.
that's right.
A good relationship will give you things that money can't buy you. They just can't.
Right.
So that's really a good point. Where you go to college does make a difference.
It makes a difference, and not because of what you learn. That's something that was totally wasted on me. I didn't realize that. It's who your classmates are, because it's all about relationships. Everything that's ever good that's ever happened to me about art, and with many of the other things that I've done a million other things besides art, have come through relationships, not from the interviews, or not because I solicited an interview, or not because of auditions. They came because they happened because somebody knew me, that was in a position to do something, and that really believed in what I did.
Right, right. Well, that's a good transition to talking about getting involved with organizations
Yeah.
like Portrait Society and others. For me, going to the Portrait Society and getting involved with that was a game changer for me. That was a real life-changing moment in my art career, where it was like, you're finally around people that do what you do and focus on what you
Yeah.
do. But the friends you make there, to
Yes.
me, the conference is more about the after hours when everybody's sitting in the hotel lobby.
That's right. Me too.
They're eating and they're drinking and they're hanging out and spending time together. That's where those relationships get formed, and
Yeah.
that's where the real action happens.
That's when it happens. That's when you meet somebody, and you hit it off, and they say, "Hey, come to my school and do a workshop."
Right.
Or "Hey, here's I got this gallery here," or that's where you really meet people. And a lot of things, I mean, the Portrait Society has been really good for me. I'm very happy that I've found that place. A lot of articles I've gotten through them. They had me do a workshop, and they bought one of my paintings. So they've been really good. And the first time I went to the Portrait Society, what happened was I was getting out of illustration. I mean, I had been doing fine art for a while, my whole life, and you sell. I used to sell watercolors a lot. I do a lot of watercolors, um, and um, and then I started to as the illustration was beginning to die out. You could see it because it's all going CG, or it's all going computer.
Yeah, Photoshop.
Yeah, and and at first they were playing the computer artists, well, but then when they realized that they don't have to pay them, it no longer became viable.
Right,
You
right.
know, it's that whole business changed, and that's another conversation we could have. But
Right. Oh, definitely, I want to go there with that conversation, because that's something that a lot of people, I think, are interested in. But keep going on your thought process for now.
so the Portrait Society, the a friend of mine, we became friends because she saw one of my paintings online, and asked to buy it, and I had already sold it. But we got into talking, and she says, you should enter some of the competitions. And so I entered the Portrait Society competition, and I made it in my first try.
Nice.
And when I went to the Portrait Society conference the first time, I think it was like 2014 or something like that. I was in heaven. I'm walking around, and there's 1,000 people who all have the same heroes as you,
Yes.
and all geek talking about Sargent and
Yeah.
Rembrandt, and and
It's one thing to go to an art conference where everybody's a different type of art or genre. But then when you go to a place where it's
Yeah.
not just their artists, but they're the exact type of artist,
Yeah.
and they have the same passion that you
Yeah.
have, and the same genre, the same. They're you basically, and that makes that connection is deeper than
It's
you would get anywhere else.
it was so wonderful. I was in heaven. I mean, I left the portrait conference that first year, and I was floating. I was floating around. Like it was just a wonderful thing. And for me that was especially good because what had happened was when I was I came up. I came of age as an artist in a time when the kind of work that we do was really frowned upon. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
You couldn't get in a gallery to save your life. You had to be a
No.
commercial artist.
Yeah. You. Well, I mean, and if you could get into a gallery, it was only through a connection. It was like a small, as far as I knew, there was like this small section of people that did representational art that made it into galleries, and they didn't sell very well. I mean, Max Ginsberg was like probably he's one of the greatest living artists. Um, had to make a living as a high school art teacher.
Right.
You think about that boggles your mind. Um, you know. So it you know, even there's some famous artists who are really well known now. At that time, I had to do illustration, and I remember, like I was doing this, and in many ways, I painted better than I do now when I was in my
Oh,
early
wow.
20s. And the reason was I'm painting 24/7. I was getting up in the morning to paint. Even after I graduated from high school, I was still coming back to the high school to sit in on that morning class.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, and then going to college. And then painting all day, and then afterwards painting all evening. I mean, it was just yeah, I
No,
was
stop.
really
Yeah.
passionate about it. Yeah, passionate about it. You know, um, but I remember I would I would show people my painting. They'd say, "Oh, you're an artist? What do you do?" And I'd show them my art, and they would go, and you can see their face just go, "Oh, you do that old stuff,
Right.
like that.
Right.
You do that stuff."
Right.
You'd go like to a gallery or something to say, "Oh, your work is too conventional," and that was the
Right.
catchword for for you're doing that realistic old stuff. And so
Right.
we made a group. We called it the Old Hat Group. Which
Oh, nice.
that's what we called the morning class, the morning painting class, the Old Hat Group, because
Mhm.
everybody was saying, "Oh, that's Old Hat," and it was really funny because Max and Greenie was Max's friend, um, would get a lot of flack from the other teachers, for this. What are you doing? You're making these kids so that they'll never get work. They're never going to work. You should
Right.
be teaching
Right.
them paste ups and mechanicals.
You should be teaching them to paint a red circle on a big wall and nothing
Yeah,
else. Yeah.
or they should be teaching them commercial art.
Right.
They're never going to make a living. You're making them so that they're unhireable. And they're painting that stuff. That stuff is old hat. Get out. So we
Right.
called it the Old Hat Club, and so we,
That.
we had each other, but that's all. I mean, as far as I knew, I didn't know that there were other pockets everywhere. There was the pocket in Boston. There were the Richard Schmidt people. There was in Chicago at the Paladin Chisel Club. You had a whole group of people in California, and thank goodness for the internet. I think that's part of it that's
That's
opened.
how it spread. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or at least to know that there are other people, that you're not alone in this world. I'll give you an example. So, on my last day of my first year of college, right, me and my friend David Panton, who's black, right, we had to get all our stuff out of the locker. And we were getting all our paintings out of the locker at the end of the day. And finally, it's our last trip. It's 10 p.m. at night. The school's about to close. And I got my last painting. I'm carrying 5 big paintings painted in this traditional old man, old hat manner, what we do,
Right.
right? I got 5 paintings, and he's got a bunch of his paintings. And we're just walking down the street in the West Village on 13th Street between 7th and 6th Avenue, right? We're going between 6th and 7th Avenue, going to the one train to take our paintings home, right? And the police pull up beside us, and two big cops get out, biggest cops I've ever seen, get out, get out of the car, and they go, "What you got there?"
They thought you robbed the museum.
Yeah, what you got there? And I said, "Oh, it's the last day of school. We're just taking our paintings home." And he goes, "Yeah, let me see what you got." And I show him my painting, and he goes, You didn't do that." And I'm Hispanic. I had this big afro, and it was black. You didn't do that." And the other guy goes, "I thought you guys only did graffiti." And laughs.
Oh man.
Right? So we're like, "Yeah, no, these are ours. Do you have ID?" No, nobody carried ID.
Right.
Right? I had like $1 to get home. That's all I had, right? Like, on me. There's no cell phones or anything. "Can you prove these are yours?" Well, if we go back to the school, the night guard was really good friends with me, and he'll vouch for me. He says, "Okay, let's walk." So they put they put the paintings in the car, right? And one walks us back, the other one drives us over, and we get to Parsons, and it's closed now.
Oh no.
So now he thinks we're lying. The school is closed. It's locked up, right? He thinks we're lying. And it's like, "Oh, well, we need to figure out, can you prove these are yours?" And so, "Well, you're going to have to come with us." So they come with us. They didn't arrest us, and we didn't know enough to say, "Are we under arrest?" Right? Or anything like that, right? They took us to the precinct. And we sat on those stupid wooden benches all night with our paintings behind the sergeant's desk, and the prostitutes come, because you just think about this. This is 1979 New York.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So it's like something out of a Columbo movie, or something, there's prostitutes everywhere sitting there coming over. And we just sitting there the whole night. They can't contact. My mom, notorious for never answering the phone after 9 o'clock, was not answering the phone. My aunt, wasn't answering the phone. David's mother wasn't answering the phone. And finally, like, I don't know, it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, they get in contact with David's mom, and she comes down and picks us up and vouches for us, and we go home. And the least they could have done is drive us home. But I just remember me and David and David's mom at like 6 o'clock in the morning, carrying our paintings, and we're exhausted from sitting on those wooden benches the whole night. We're sitting on these wooden benches the whole night, But it mainly happened because, and in some ways you can understand. They wouldn't believe that we did this, because David had also been. Yeah, David had also gone to the morning class, so he's very skilled artist. He so like in this kind of work, right? And he was very representation, really beautiful paintings, and so it was you could see them looking at the paintings, and they're nudes, they're like, like they're classical, because, and so
they look like paintings from a museum.
Yeah, no. Why they wouldn't believe it. Now it's different. Now,
right.
There's
That's like the best story ever, though. I can just picture it in my head. You sitting on the bench, 2 kids.
It's funny, and I didn't even know enough to be angry about it. I wasn't even upset about it. We weren't even upset. We were just tired.
Right.
It wasn't until I told one of my teachers, and my teacher, he freaked out. "Oh, we got to do so." He's like one of these very, very liberal, fight for the people, and and he's like, I was like, "No, it's okay. It's okay." He wanted to go down and see, if he could like, storm the precinct.
Yeah,
they were mad. It was funny. Everybody else was madder than me and David.
So they didn't ask you, like, prove it, draw us a picture?
No,
that wouldn't solve the problem.
It never occurred to me to say, "How, let's draw."
That's funny, because when I was in the military, I joined the military as really just a way to get out of my hometown. And so I went in open general, which means they get to pick what job you have, which is the dumbest thing you can ever do in the military. But I was so desperate to get out of my hometown, and I didn't have the option to go to college, couldn't afford it. My grades weren't that great. So it wasn't going to happen. So I joined the Air Force. And while I was in basic training, we met a career counselor, and she was going through my files, and she says, "It says here you're an artist. Why didn't you go into graphics?" And I'm like, "My recruiter told me there was no graphic jobs. There were no art jobs in the Air Force." And she goes, "You throwing your recruiter under the bus?" I'm like, "No, ma'am." She had like 6 stripes on her arms. I had 0. So I was like, you know, when you're in basic training, anything with 2 stripes, you're like vomiting from death fear, you know? And so she said, she pulled a yellow notepad and she threw it at me and a ballpoint pen. And she took a picture of her pet dog and she said, draw this dog. And I was like, ma'am, she goes, draw the dog. I'm like, you know, so I drew the dog and I handed it back to her and she looked at me and she was like, don't move. And she left me there for 20 minutes. And I'm sitting in her office, don't know what's happening. She comes back with a different dog and she says, draw this dog, but like a cartoon this time. So I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. I draw the dog, hand it back to her. She leaves again for another 30 minutes this time. Still hasn't told me what's happening. She comes back. She says, the colonel says you drew a good dog. She says, come with me. You have to take a test. So I took the test. She brings me in this giant room. I have to take a 2-hour test. It's an art test.
Wow.
And I'm like, what is going on? She's never told me what's happening the whole time. So I take this 2-hour test. I come back. She says, all right. She gives me a Coca-Cola, like, because that was like contraband in basic training. You're only allowed to drink water. She gave me a fully leaded Coca-Cola. I was like, yeah. And so she's like, she leaves me. She comes back and she's like, you passed, you passed. And I'm like, yay, what does that mean? What's going on? And she said, well, that was the final exam for the graphic specialist technical school. You're going to be an artist for the Air Force.
Wow.
And so I got a job. And then long story short, I ended up being an artist for the Air Force and spent my art career, you know, doing all kinds of cool things and had a great career. And then, but it was like, that's how she did it. Here, draw this dog. And I'm like, okay, you should have drew the dog, man. You would have got out of jail.
That's really awesome. That's like you won the lottery.
Oh, it really was. It really was, because one of the things that happened was after she told me I passed that test, she said, I'm going to go find you a job. And the way the military works, there's only so many slots. And so to get a job, somebody has to retire, die, or just get out of the military. And so there's only so many graphic specialist jobs. That's a very small career field in the military. And so she came back like a couple hours later and she was in tears. And she said, there's no jobs. You're going to have to go back and be whatever we pick for you. And I was crushed. So I marched back by myself at like 10 o'clock at night to the dorms. And my drill sergeant, he screamed my name the minute I walked in the door. And that's the last thing you want to hear is a drill sergeant call your name. He said, Gagnon, get in here. And I was like, oh, no, I'm dead. So I go in there and he said, Tech Sergeant so-and-so, I can't remember. I wish I could find this person. But she said, he said, you need to call her right now. So I ran down to the payphones and I called her up and she said, there's one job on the planet. Do you want it? So somebody had retired or created a slot in the time I walked home.
Wow.
And so I said, yeah, I want it. She says, don't you want to know where it is? I said, I don't care. And it was Panama City Beach, Tyndall Air Force Base. And I've been here ever since. So yeah, that's like a, you know, it's
what a life-changing moment, huh?
It really was. And that, you know, that's how I started being a professional artiste, you know, so, you know, and I designed, I was supposed to design weapon systems and do like artist renderings and schematics and things like that. We were Skunk Works, that we invented weapon systems. But then the commander found out that Airman Gagnon could create caricatures. And so I spent the last 3 years of my career pretty much drawing caricatures of retiring big shots.
Oh, that's funny.
Drove my boss nuts. She was so mad. She got me in there to help her, and I didn't get to help her because I was drawing, you know, Colonel so-and-so retiring.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it was a pretty good gig. So how did you start your career? Like, because I've got a picture I want to show here, and you alluded to it. So I want to go there because it just fascinates me about how, what you were talking about, how you couldn't make a living in museums, in the traditional, like when you think of artists having art in a gallery, as a figurative artist, as a representational artist, it's very difficult for a very long time to do that. And so most figurative representational artists had to make their living in a commercial art type way, magazine covers, book covers, comic books, as what really some people would call illustrators, not painters.
Right.
I want to show this picture here. This is one of your paintings from early in your career. My mother probably had this book. My mother was an avid romance novel reader. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this and how it worked for you.
Well, first of all, that happened by accident, right? So even though I had taken illustration in college, I still, my dream was to be a fine artist, right? And I had this idea that I didn't care if people bought my work or not. If I just wanted to have a studio and make these big paintings, and I wanted
Right.
to, and I, I, I had no expectation, so I did one of those online. It wasn't online. It's what do you call it? Mail order
Yes.
courses, right? That's from our generation. That's what we used to do before you had online learning. You had mail order. I did a mail order course on bartending, thinking that, you know what, I'm just going to be a bartender and paint. And funny thing happened in while I was in college, is that one of Max Ginsberg's old students was now an art director at Scholastic Books, and called him in. And another friend of his, Len Leone, was an art director at Bantam Books. And Len said, "Hey, Max, let me see some of your paintings. Do you think you can do some of these romance covers or something like that? The historical, something like that." And Max says, "Yeah, sure." So Max did a romance cover, right? And he did some other for another student, who's an art director. He did these still lives that were meant as prints,
Okay.
and they had so much success with that they gave him another one and then another one. And in those days, because the book covers sold the book, not what happens now. You got a lot of money. I mean, they really put a lot of attention into the book covers. Yeah, and the runs were a lot bigger than they are now because it costs so much to fire up a printing press. Now, with the print on demand, they don't have to make huge runs, right?
Right.
Big, but in those days, when you did a book, you wanted you wanted it to sell because the minimum you had to print 100,000, 200,000 copies,
Right. Just to make it cost effective. Yeah.
just to make it cost effective. And when you walk down the aisle in Barnes and Noble, like it was nobody bought online, right? There was no such thing.
Right. Just
So it was just book. So you walk down the aisle in Barnes and Noble and say, like, there's romance covers or westerns or mystery, right? There's 350 books, of the same genre.
Right.
And so you're walking down. How do you know what to pick? It's the cover. The
Yeah.
job was to pick, to get
You
them.
needed an image that made women go,
Yep.
"I want that book."
All your job was to get them to pick the book off the shelf and turn it around. Then your job is done. When they look at the other side, now it's the copywriter in the back. It's their job to sell the book, when you read a little bit about the book, right? And so they really hired some like incredible artists, and they paid them well. Like, I mean, like you could average like $5,000 a cover, $7,500 a cover,
Wow. Really? Wow.
and you could do 3 or 4 a month, like if you're working for different, it was like a salary, like it was
Right.
like a salary job because an art director likes you, they know they can trust you. They give you a cover once every month and a half. And then you go to Bantam and they give you a cover once every 1 month and a half. And then, you go to, there were a lot more publishing companies back. You go to Dell Doubleday and they give you a cover. And so you
Right.
had all the top publishing companies all feeding you covers, and paying you a lot of, really good money, and all expenses paid, right? They would pay for the models. They would pay for a photo studio to do your photo shoot.
Really?
They
Wow.
would pay for a photographer, a professional photographer to do. You didn't have to sit there and develop, because in those days we had to develop film, right? You didn't
Right.
have to worry about any of that. You had a professional photographer there. You directed the photographer. He handled. You told him, I want the lighting like this. I want the lighting like this. You had a costume company. They would get costumes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. The costume companies was a place called Eves Brooks, which was an amazing place out in Queens, and it was 5 floors, and they did costumes for movies, for Broadway shows, and each floor was a different era, and you'd walk in and, oh, okay, I need to go a Regency piece, and you'd go in and you're like walking through the Middle Ages looking at costumes.
Oh, geez.
I mean, that place is gone, long gone, but it was an amazing thing, and all that was paid for on top of your $5,000. It could be anywhere for like the young adults. It was $2,500 was the average price plus expenses. To some people like Max was making like $7,500 a cover, plus all for the wraparound romances for Harlequin.
Mm.
And um, he started doing it, and all of a sudden he's making all this money. So he decided to take a year sabbatical and see how this was going to work out for him, right? So from the school. So he took a year sabbatical and made more money than he had made like in 7 years teaching, right?
Yeah.
And never came back to teach at high school. He just continued to do the romance. And when all of us graduated, we continued in the same path as well, right? So, and what happened was my last year in college, I got my first illustration assignment. While I was still in college, I got 2 illustration assignments. Well, no, one right after I graduated, and one just before. One was for a company called Aerial Books, and I did, Treasure Island and Kidnapped. Robert Louis Stevenson's. I did the inside, and the other one I did was first illustration was for a John le Carre novel. Um, um, what was it called? The Something War, and it was for Reader's Digest.
Oh, wow.
So, like I started like right away there, and then I started. There were 2 art directors that were using Max, regularly. One was David Tomasino at Scholastic, and the other one was Matt Tepper at Avon. And at first, it's hard, like the way they did the portfolio interviews, you would drop off your portfolio. Every company had like once a month or once a week, you could drop off your portfolio at a certain time, like Thursday morning or something like that. And you drop it off and you get it back, and they hadn't even taken your card. You know what I mean? And so like, it was hard to get in, but I started making inroads at Avon with the secretary, who was like this older one who just, for whatever reason, just really liked me, right? I said, I'm going to make sure he sees it. I'm going to make sure Matt sees it, right? At the same time, David, who had been a student of Max Ginsberg in high school, was like, I really like what you do, but we got to, you be willing to try, just do a sample. I said, sure, just give me anything, do it. So you don't have to pay me, I'll do it.
Right.
And he said, okay, yeah, here's some of this, he gave me the spec sheet, and he showed me, this is what you do, and we do the photography, in person, we do the photography at a studio called Osage Studios, and you can do the photography, but here I'm just gonna give you somebody else's photos, just do something, and I said, great. So I go back to Matt Tepper, right, who now is he's talking to me too, and he's not ready to use me yet either, right? I'm 21 years old, and so he goes, I like the way, but I don't know. I said, I just got an assignment from, I didn't tell him it was a sample. Right? I just got an assignment for Scholastic. He goes, oh, really? And I said, yeah, I got an assignment for Scholastic. He said, I'd like to see it when it's done. So I did the Scholastic assignment. I showed it to him before I brought it over to Dave. And he says, that's great. I think I could use you. And then I go to Dave, and Dave started giving me assignments as well. Right. And, what was I gonna say? So Matt put me on this a series. Now it was the low pay, it was the low end romance covers for young adults, and that series was it was $1,200 a cover, but they paid for the models and and it was great, and that's how I got into the business. And then once you're working at one publishing company and you got the covers, you can go to another one and to another one and to another one.
See that you've done work for somebody else, so they know you can do it. You know how to do it. You know how to work with them.
Yeah.
So,
And it's interesting because the very next company that I got was Bantam, right? And that happened because the assistant art director the assistant to the art director had been a student at Parsons, and she had been raving to the art director about me. This Ricky, you got to see Ricky. So she called me in. Marva Martin called me in, and I showed her my work, and she says, "Oh yeah, great," you know, and and she hired me. On a funny side note, there was another student from the graphic art department who had recommended me early on, even before I showed Scholastic and before I showed Avon. It was another company. It was, I think it was Little Brown Books or something, which I ended up working for later, right? And I brought in, and I had my portfolio was all over the place. I had a a very tight piece. I had a very loose piece. I had, a young adult piece, an older piece, a painterly piece, a piece that was photorealistic. And the art director called me in, right? And he says, my assistant really believes in you. She thinks you're really great. And I'm looking at your work, and I can see you're very skillful, but you're gonna have a problem. I can't use you, right? But um, and I'm gonna tell you why. And he goes through my portfolio, and I had like 24 pieces in my portfolio, right? And they're all like it looked like 20 different artists, right? Because I figure, you know, maybe they'll see something that they can use, if there's a lot of different things in the portfolio. And he's looking, going through the piece. He goes, "Look at this. You see this? This is a painterly piece, right? You paint really well, but if I'm going to need a painterly piece, I'm going to go to an artist who's known as being painterly. I'm going to go to Skip Lepke, which is now, which at that time he was, is Malcolm Lepke now, but at that time he was an illustrator as well. I'm going to go to Skip Lepke to to do it. If I need a photorealistic piece, I'm going to Michael D's. If I need this, you are just confusing me. He goes, "Did you ever look at the want ads in the New York Times? There are a lot of want ads for art directors. That's because there's a lot of pressure on us, and they're getting fired. They get fired all the time. So we can only trust people that we want to know what we're going to get. We don't want any surprises. I recommend you, if you're never going to get any work with this portfolio, take out everything except your best pieces. Choose a direction. You're going to be realistic. You're going to be painterly, or you're going to be tight. You know, choose a direction." He said, "Four great pieces is better than 20 pieces where some of them are mediocre." And I left there, and I was like, so like, because I hadn't gotten any assignment yet, other than those two, the Richard, the Reader's Digest, and the thing. And
That is some fantastic
he
advice.
was a vat. I mean, I left. I was like, I felt like crap, right?
Right.
And I got an apartment right as soon as I got out of college. So now I'm having to pay rent too. So I'm not living at home, right?
Right.
And I'm like, what am I gonna do? And I'm like, at first, like the advice comes to you, and you don't realize what a golden nugget it is, And
Right.
then I got home, and I sat down, and I felt like crushed, because I didn't even really want to do illustration at
Right.
first. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
now I'm failing at this,
Right.
and he's like, he really tore one, tore one into me. And I get home, and I said, you know what? Maybe he's right. And so I decided I'm going to go for the more tighter pieces, because Dave, because other people kept saying that, this is before Photoshop. So they wanted to look like it was Photoshop. Right.
Right.
Right. And so I picked four pieces, just four pieces of the tighter pieces. And those four pieces, are what got Dave to see me. They what got Matt to see me. They got me there. What Bantam hired me on those four pieces. And so the biggest lesson that I learned is it's better to have four great pieces than 20.
The
And
20, yeah.
and one of the things never left my mind, and it applies whether you do, fine art or portraits, right? He said, we live in a world, that art director, said, we live in a world where everybody wants to put you in a cubbyhole. They want to know what they're gonna get, right? They want to know who you are. They don't want any surprises. You know, this is what Ricky does. When you think about any major artist ever in history, any artist that,
Right.
regardless, I say Rembrandt, you instantly know what he's about. I
Right.
say Leonardo, instantly. Sargent, Picasso, even through all of Picasso's periods, right? We know exactly, like it or not, we know exactly where Picasso's coming from.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's what we need to.
That is some fabulous advice. I mean, I knew this was going to be a good one. I knew this was going to be a good one, and just that nugget that you dropped is huge. I remember when I just got out of the military, I was trying to get into the comic book industry, and I got critiqued. I convinced, and this is again before the internet, and I was able to get my art hero at the time in the comic book industry anyway, Mark Bagley. And he's drawn Spider-Man since I was probably 15 years old.
Wow.
And he's still drawing Spider-Man, and he's drawn everything else, And I tracked him down. I found out that he lived in Atlanta. And so I got my hands on the white pages for Atlanta, Georgia. And I totally stalked the guy. I'm not going to lie. Called him up, told him who I was, told him what I was trying to do, asked him if he would critique my work, mailed him some artwork. I don't know why he agreed. But he agreed, and he gave me the most brutal, ruthless, heart-wrenching, crushing critique. And he had a catchphrase that he would say, because he didn't just critique me page by page, it was panel by panel throughout the comic book page. And so it was like 15 miniature critiques per page. And so he would say, on this panel, what were you thinking? Oh yeah, you weren't. And I was like, oh my God, it's just horrible.
It's worse when they're right? It's worse when they're right.
Yeah. And so after the critique, I mean, he was brutal. He wasn't like politically correct. He wasn't, I mean, it was just mean, but it was perfect because everything he said was true. And I remember, my heart was just crushed because this was my art hero growing up, And so I remember having this moment. Marvel Comics doesn't let just anybody draw Spider-Man. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. I mean, maybe you should listen. And that aha moment was great because after the critique, he gave me a bunch of books to tell me to go buy. And again, this is before the internet. So I had to go drive all over Northwest Florida trying to find books and things like that. And convince the store owners this isn't in stock. Can you order it for me and all that? But 6 months after doing what he said, looking at what I sent him, going, "What were you thinking? Oh, you weren't thinking." So, what you said was so powerful on that. That your portfolio you need to find your artistic voice. Yeah. And how important that is in a portfolio review, because when people are trying to hire you for a job, they need to know what they're getting out of you. That is such great advice.
Well, I often do portfolio reviews at Portrait Society, mm-hmm. and I give them the same advice, although I'm not brutal. I don't like he was to me. Like he made me feel like I left with my tail between my legs,
right?
And but I do see that even people with their portrait portfolio, right? It looks like 4 different people did it.
Right.
And I get that. I think
we've all been there. Finding your voice.
I'm still there. Now, it's finding your voice is really hard. It's really tough. You're always finding your voice and you're always changing, right? And it's much better to go through stages. And you just think back, to putting Picasso, he didn't do all those things, all those different stages at one shot, right?
Right.
He went through a blue period and then through a cubist period, right? And if you look at his earlier work, there was a part where he looked like Monet, and then there was a part where it looked like Toulouse-Lautrec, and there was a part. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they were in sections so that every time he had a cohesive body of work. But and um how, as an artist though, like the art side of me, not the illustration side of me, wants to experiment. I
Yeah.
want to do, big painterly and use a brush like that big,
Right.
like
Try something
you
different,
know
make it
like
look different.
the
Right.
size of. And then other times I feel like I want to, get in there with a little 00 brush and noodle. Maybe I can't do it anymore because I can't see good enough.
You're
Well,
right. Yeah. Getting old ain't no fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
I need to get the big the glasses that look like bottle caps for that. But you wanna do that. I want to try all different subjects. There's a lot of stuff that I need to do, and um, you I think there's room for that, but not at once. You see,
Right. Right. That's a
you
good
you
point. Yeah.
you, you
Be
put a
cohesive while you're showing, especially if you're showing a portfolio.
yeah
Portfolio needs to be very, very concise.
yeah.
And that's really a great point. Speaking of your portfolio and your artistic voice, I want to show some of your paintings that are from your website recently. We showed your artwork from earlier in your career when you were doing the romance novels. So here's some artwork that you've done recently, and this is one of my favorites. I love this one.
That
Um,
was, I think that was a final. That was a finalist the year you went, right?
yeah, that's right.
With the
That's
Portrait
right.
Society, yeah.
Yeah, and so tell us a little bit about what was the mindset behind this painting.
So this painting has a really interesting story. It actually was gonna be part of a triptych. So there's another painting that's the centerpiece, and I never got to the side piece. I ended up liking this painting on its own. Um, so back in 2008, around there, around the time, there were those Iranian elections, if you remember, where Ahmadinejad got elected. Around that time, I was hanging out on a website called, this is pre-Facebook days. I mean, Facebook was around, but nobody was really on that. But I was hanging out on a website called conceptart.org,
Okay.
and I'm on a thread where they're like really just some awesome artists. Like the guy who did the concept art for Iron Man was on
Oh
there.
wow.
And some really, you know, well-known, CG artists are on there, and talking about art, and all of a sudden, some guy begins to post um, photos of police coming and beating up students, uh,
Hmm.
um, you know, and things like that, having to do with Iran. And so Craig, I think it's Greg Mullins, very famous CG, says, "What are you doing? Why are you posting that here?" And he says, you know, we're trying to get a better society. These elections coming are very important. They were trying to vote for the Green Party, which is a secular party, right? Um, we're trying to make a change, in our country, but all the news media is being, and they're really suppressing our vote. They're really suppressing us, but all the news media is they're they're monitoring the news sites. I mean, all the government is really monitoring the news sites. So I figure if we get out the artists will know what to do with it. And so,
Oh,
so Mullins, yeah, so Mullins said, yeah, go ahead, post, right? And then begin, and it was the most fascinating next couple of weeks. Every day, I couldn't wait to open up to see what this guy had posted. He's posting students. He'd post, poems. He posted just last night. I heard bullets. He's talking. It was,
mhm.
but the students, the college students. And he's posting and talking about what's going on. One day he posts. I saw her. I was there. Oh well, one day this is today is the election. I'm very excited. And then 10 minutes into the election, he's posting. They're already claiming the victory. They're stealing the election from
Ah,
us,
right.
right? They're already claiming. How is that even possible? There were a million people marched in the street.
Right.
The next day, the students all felt that the election was robbed, so they went protest. A million people got on the street and protest,
Mm.
right? And so he's showing pictures of the protests. He's showing pictures of people, the cops beating up the protester. The following day, he posts, "I saw her. I was, I was there. Nida, she, they shot her just for being at the protests.
Oh gosh, yeah.
We got the guy who did it, but we had to let him go. It's go, and posted a picture of Nada. And then I didn't hear anything about it. Right? She says,
Mhm.
it's like she was beautiful. I didn't hear anything about it at all. A week
Right,
later, it bursts on the whole world. Begins to find out about this woman who had gone to the protests. Just to show up, right, with her
right.
music teacher, and some sniper, government sniper, shot her. And the pictures all over the internet of her bleeding. She was shot, and she died. On there, and then she became. They made this poster of her, and she became the face of everybody who wants a voice of the vote.
The voiceless, yeah.
The voiceless, and um I'm thinking that really moved me, because here we take the vote for granted. Other places, people are dying because they want their vote to count, right?
Right.
And not to mention that happened here too. Anyway, well, um it turns out that the government tried to get her parents to say that it was not a government that shot her, that it was another
Oh
protester, right?
God.
And they refused, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
they made her, this girl Nada, a martyr, a martyr. And
Right.
what that meant was that she could not have a signed grave. She could not have a funeral, or mass for her funeral, right? She had to be buried in an unmarked grave. And so, and I'm thinking, and being a father, I'm not thinking about it like that. I'm thinking about it as the terms from the father, from the parent's point of view. What
Right.
happens when you have a child that you can't? And so the middle painting was, I have, you might see it on the website somewhere. It's the mother holding the dead daughter. And so I had two friends pose. One, she's an actress, and the other one was one of the women that I used to use for my romance covers, who became a good friend of mine.
Right.
you know I had them pose, and I did that painting. And this was the side. So that's the mother holding the daughter, doesn't know what to do with the body.
Right.
And I got the idea for the image from Kate Coleridge. Kate Coleridge, who's one of my all-time favorite artists. I think she's number 3 on my list, right? And especially now, in the times that we're living in, her work is really, um, would hold up well right now, right?
Mhm.
This was going to be the other side, and it's the father, standing next to the poster
Right.
of
Wow.
her, right? And as you see the poster, it's I made it kind of nondescript, but it's really the famous poster of her, of the girl, with the blood. But I
Mhm,
made it so that it looks like the side of her cheek looks like wings, like angel wings on the father,
mhm.
and the light, and there's bullet on the wall, and stuff. But the premise of it really is from the parents' point of view. You think about the Beatles song. Everybody's talking about a revolution, but really,
Right.
what's the cost of it? Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so that's the cost. And I had done another. Originally, I was going to do it um, facing the father, right? So I did
Mhm.
another little study for using 3 mirrors, with of me that won a lot of awards, and you might see that on my website. There's
Yeah,
a
I
study.
think I have that
Yeah,
one here. Let me see
yeah,
if I
I'm
can
looking
call
up
it
at.
up. Let's see here. I've got it in our thing. It might let me call it up.
Well,
Let's
that
see.
was the original. That was the original idea, but then I made it. I
Let's
made
see
myself to the side.
if it is. Let's see this one.
Yes, that one.
Okay, so this was a study for the
Yeah,
other band.
that was a study. That was originally is going to be me against the wall like this, right? And so I did the study because both of these are done from life. They're not done from photos. And
So you had
so
set
this
up
one is done with
mirrors.
2 mirrors. Yeah, this is done with 2 mirrors. The other one's done with 3. So the other one, with this one, I set a mirror. I had a mirror on a tripod up here above me and
Mhm.
one below me, right? So I'm looking at that one, which is looking down at this one. You
Oh
see,
gosh!
so it's
Wow.
looking up at me. Just to
Oh,
get,
I got you.
you
Okay.
see,
Hmm.
and the other one of me, right? I have a mirror and I have it set up like two. First, it's 2 mirrors, two
Hmm.
big mirrors, set up the way when you go to a fitting department in a clothing store.
Okay.
When you go into the dressing room, they have the mirrors side by side, so you can look at yourself from the side when you
Right.
try on the clothes, right? And
Mhm.
then I had the mirror that I used for up here, which is a little hand mirror that I sort of MacGyvered a little contraption so that I can put it on a tripod, right?
Mm.
And so that mirror. So what I did is I have the two mirrors, and then the third mirror was only for my eyes, which I also used in the other painting that you like on the subway, right? So I painted myself from the side, and then I put the little mirror so I could see my eyes looking down.
So that is this one.
Yes. So that one, that's me too, right?
Mhm.
And so my eyes, I did the same way, so that's looking down, right? And um, one of the reasons that like a lot of people are like, why are you bothering to work from life? Just take photos. I have nothing against working from photos, and I do. I mean, I went for illustration.
Right.
I so but I like the challenge of working from life, right? I think drawing is something that you have to maintain,
Yes.
right? And every time, and the more practice I can get, anytime I can get practice in it, I take advantage of it. You know, if I can work from life, that's better. If I work from photographs, I don't trace for that same reason as well. Some people
Right.
trace, and I got nothing against that, right? But the reason I don't trace is because then you begin to lose the skills, right?
Exactly. You plateau your skills.
You plateau your skills, and you can see there are artists that you see they were very skillful, but then over the years they began to trace for speed, right? I mean, it's a business
Right.
decision.
You gotta get it. Yeah. You
You
gotta
got to
get
get
it.
it done, right? And but then you see them working from life. You see how they've lost it a little bit. When they work from
Right.
life, like you have to do it every day. It's a muscle. There's an anecdote from Pavarotti that I always like. And Pavarotti, I mean, he's an incredible singer, and probably the greatest tenor that ever lived. Um, he had this. I heard him in an interview, and he's talking about. They ask him, how often do you exercise? Do you vocalize? He says every day I vocalize 4 hours. I just do scales and before I even do my repertoire. He works 4 hours just working on his technique
Moving the
every
muscle.
day. Every
Yeah.
day. He goes, sometimes I miss a day. And sometimes that's good. I get a rest. Sometimes I miss 2 days. If I miss 2 days, I notice. Sometimes I miss 3 days. If I miss 3 days, the audience notices.
Boy,
And
that's good. Yeah.
that's
3 days and
good.
the audience notices.
Then the audience, and it's the same. You go too many days without really just working on your drawing
Yep.
skills. People
Yep.
begin to notice.
Yeah. When
And
I was a kid, there was a show on PBS. It was called Secret City. And it had this guy. He wore like a flight suit, but instead of a pilot, he had like Sharpie markers here and patches and all this stuff. And he would end every episode with, "Remember, kids, draw, draw, draw. Practice your drawing 30 minutes every day." And I would be like, "Yes, Commander Mark," and I'd run and I'd draw, things like that. But that was the best advice you could give. Is
yeah,
every day.
and it's a funny thing because so one of my side incomes, I teach. I
Mhm.
teach at the Art Students League, and I teach at Chelsea Classical. And one of the things that I like to do, and I like to to tell people about that, is, do you know how you have a violinist, even Pavarotti? Let's go Pavarotti example. He takes 4 hours where he separates the art, the music, from the scales,
Yes.
right? You have a violinist. They spend, before they do anything, they separate the making of the music from the technical. So they sit and they work on their fingering, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
there's no reason that we as artists, especially skill-based artists, can't do that, right?
Right.
You know, why not start every day with a warm-up that has
Right.
nothing to
You
do with
gotta
paint?
Yeah, that's a great, great thing. One of the things I like to do, and I tell my students this all the time, is that I create value scales
Yeah.
Really intricate. They're not a color wheel. It's because I do the color. I do a color bar this way, and then I tint, tone, and shade each color. And I do that, and I spend 2-3 days on those things.
Yeah.
And I do that every 6 months.
Nice.
Just to keep,
Just to keep it going.
Just to keep that sharp edge on there, sharpen those knives,
One of the things that there are two things that I like to do for that, sometimes, like if I feel like I'm getting a little rusty because it's been too many days working from photos, or, I, I get a tracing paper pad, right? And magazine, right? And I take the picture from a magazine or an old photo, and I put it up on my easel on a board, right? Then I take the tracing paper, I put it over the thing, and I just mark off the outlines of the photo, so I know so I can put it back. And then I take it side by side, and then I just make marks like, okay, this is where the side of the head is. This is the arm. This is the proportion. Side by side, right? And then I do a couple of marks, using straight lines, and then I put it back over the photo to see how off I am.
Oh, that's great. I
So
like
it's like
that.
having a teacher that you can't, like how many times have you had a student, you say, hey, you say, oh, the arm is a little too long, and they're like, no, I don't see that. I can't see it. It's not long.
Right.
They are. This is indisputable.
Right.
You put the
That's a
thing
great
right on.
That's an old school way, because what I'll do when I give a critique, I'll ask them, send me your reference photo and send me your painting. And then I bring it into Photoshop and I do a screen capture.
Yeah.
And I overlay them, and you instantly see it that way.
Yes.
That's pretty much what you're doing there.
Yeah. So you're more advanced.
Yeah. Photoshop. Yeah.
I'm more of a Luddite.
Yeah.
No,
I came in right at that. It's like I remember Photoshop 1 when I was in the military, and so we had to transition because we had a desk. I had a drafting table that was like 8 feet long, 6 feet deep, tilted up. It weighed like 1,000 pounds, and then we went to computers. So it was a little bit different, but I remember using Corel Draw of all things and all that. So, it's like, I remember before Photoshop and after Photoshop. I've got plenty of scars from X-Acto knives and things like that on me.
That's right.
I remember bleeding all over a schematic one time that I've been working on. So
that happened to me.
It happened,
I remember cutting mats for my portfolio for the romance covers, cutting mats and then bleeding all over my print, what do you call them? The printed the prints of
Okay, the Giclée print, yeah.
No, the prints of the cover. This is before the proofs,
the
proofs. The book cover proofs. Trying to frame them into mats.
It happens. Well, hey, because we're at 68 minutes. This cover. I could talk to you for days.
Yeah,
but I do want to talk real quick about one other thing that's near and dear to your heart, because I think everybody needs to know about this. Matter of fact, I'm thinking I'm going to clip this part that we're about to talk about and make a separate video for YouTube just on this to talk about it. Can you talk to us real quick about, or take as long as you want, about your transition to going solvent-free and why you did that? Like, what's the difference? And get real basic for us, because let me see here. I'm going to reach over here next to my desk, talking about, solvents like turpentines and different things that we have, and as an oil painter, solvents will kill you dead. They're really not good for you. This one, it does say harmful or fatal if swallowed. Eye irritant.
Avoid fumes. Avoid fumes.
And some people, like me, I love the smell, and being old school and all that. Like when I was in the military, we used to wash our hands in MEK. Oh, wow. And some of my military buddies can tell you, MEK is methanol, ethanol, and kerosene all mixed together in a barrel. It's totally illegal to have now, but I was in the military back in the day, and we would wash our hands in it. And when you put your hands in it, you could taste it.
Wait, in junior high school, we had a print shop, and you'd wash your hands. You'd wash your hands with they had this mineral spirit, like these petroleum distillates. And,
Yeah.
you know, um, see what happened with me. So you have to understand that I've been painting now. How old am I? I've been painting, 45 years. Maybe
Wow.
you know.
Okay.
And when I started painting, we didn't care, right? So
Yeah. When
like
you think
you,
about it, yeah.
Max's classroom, you could smell it was on the fourth floor, room 416. You could smell it from from the lobby because we used to use gum turpentine, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I
Right.
was cheap, so I would get the wood turpentine at the hardware store. You can get a big gallon
You get
can for the
down on
same
it, yeah.
price you get the little art store can, right?
Then the smell would knock you over.
To knock you over. But we used to love that smell. You love that smell. So I painted like that for years, and then we went odorless with the odorless paints, with the odorless mineral spirits. When they said, okay,
Right.
you can
Just
use
because you can't smell it doesn't mean it's not horrifically
no.
to inhale.
In some ways, it's worse, right? Because at least the wood turpentine was coming from trees, and the gum. Whereas the mineral spirit, they're petroleum distillates, right? They're from
Right.
right. But everybody, you had to all of a sudden you weren't allowed to use turpentine. It had to be you can't smell it, and so I began to use those over the years. Now, about maybe a little bit less than a decade ago, right? It finally caught up to me, and I started to get really, really, really sick. I'd be in my studio, and I would, like I would paint for 3 hours, and I would feel like this pain around my center, in the center of my stomach. I and then when we moved out here in 2015, where it would get really bad, and I was looking for all kinds of ways to try and not use as many spirits, and I didn't know that you could paint solvent free. So at first I tried the spike lavender oil, and the spike lavender oil, um, it's supposed to be non-toxic, right? But the problem with the spike lavender oil is that it smells a lot, and it still affected me. It still made me feel sick.
Yeah, it's strong because I did that. I switched over to Spike Lavender, and I remember talking to you on Facebook, and we were on oh gosh, I'm going blank on
Best practices,
yes,
or
best practices or
traditional painting.
yes, it was the
Virgil,
traditional
Virgil's.
painting one, and I had mentioned that I've been using Spike oil, and then you were like, "That's still a solvent, brother," and I'm like,
Oh yeah,
I thought it was, but it's strong. That stuff will knock
it's
you over.
strong. I did a demo once, and half the people walked out after the first hour. They couldn't.
Yeah,
They
yeah. For those of you out there that aren't familiar with spike oil, it's basically, and it's labeled as lavender essential oils.
right.
So, essential oils are all the hot thing right now,
Yeah.
and it's from lavender. It's from the flower, lavender flower.
Yeah.
But it smells like flowers, but it smells like you shoved them so far up your nose you can't breathe.
Yeah.
Really
It's
strong.
terrible. And that made me sick too. Anyways, and then so I'm like, so I'm a little bit discouraged. And then I started to look. I tried the water soluble oils, and I'm thinking, okay, let's try these water soluble oils, right? And the problem with those, first of all, aside from the fact that they're relatively new, haven't been tested, is also that they're not made for professional artists, right?
Mhm.
They're made for hobbyists,
Right.
really, that's one. Two, you can't use bristles because the water makes the bristles fluff up like cotton balls.
Makes it
So you
swell.
have to use, they swell up. So you can only use the synthetics, which I hate. I love, I'm a bristle painter. I love painting with bristles, right? So there's that. And then it also looks gummy. And then I started, doing some research on them, of ways to stop that gummy feel you get, and so they make a solvent for the water soluble oils. And think
Right.
about just how crazy that is, right?
You
They
know.
make a solvent, and they make water soluble linseed oil,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
like, it's not gonna work.
And you know the difference between that is it's just they've turned it into cooking oil.
Yeah,
They vulcanize it so that it's oil and water don't mix. So cooking oil has been not chemically, but it's been heat treated so that it's water soluble.
Yeah.
And so somebody said, well, why don't we just put cooking oil in the, put the linseed oil in the same process as cooking oil is, so that it can be soap and water cleanup. But it's still not the same. It's not the same.
It's not. And who knows? I mean, that's not a natural thing. Like, I mean, who knows what the longevity of the painting is going to be? Like the way I feel about the longevity of the painting. Everybody, who cares? You're going to be dead. But the way I feel about it, if somebody is going to care enough to buy my work that allows me to paint another day, I want to at least do the extra little bit that I can to make it so that the painting, well, so that they can at least pass it on to their children if they love it, or their grandchildren if they don't decide to throw it away someday. Which
Right.
but so I care about that. So that was out of the question, and I began to start thinking about acrylics again. I used to sometimes use acrylics as an underpainting for the illustration, so that I can speed up the whole first pass.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
thinking,
I combine acrylics and oils in a similar way.
yeah,
The way I do my illuminations with text and underpainting and gilding, I do all that in acrylic, but then I paint the figure in oil on top of it. Because you can't. There's no way I would be able to put the text in with oils.
yeah. What I used to do is I would do the whole underpainting in acrylic, right, and just flat, like
Right.
flat planes and patches, right. And then when then I would just oil paint, and the oil would basically be just to turn to smooth things out.
Right.
And it made it so that I was averaging 4 or 5 illustrations a month.
Right.
In the 80s, and so that made it so that was possible, but so I'm thinking about using acrylic. I'm like, I don't really want to use acrylics, and then I read an article about Rembrandt, you know um they didn't use, I read an article about solvents, and they were talking about Rembrandt, and you know turns out that solvents is a relatively new thing in painting.
Right.
It didn't start happening. People didn't start using solvents until the mid 19th century. And if you read the writings of the time, there are a lot of artists that are like saying, "Oh, this is terrible. Don't use the solvents." It gets this. The describing what we call now sinking in,
Sinking
where the
in.
colors get. That happens to the paintings. It's don't use, and then others are swearing by it. You can clean your brushes so much and well in between, right? But one of the things that the article made me aware of is that all those beautiful Rembrandts, all those beautiful Velasquez paintings, they're all done solvent free.
Mm.
They didn't have solvent, and they didn't have running water, right? So they didn't clean the brush. They used oil to clean the brushes. And I remembered back to when I was in junior high school, my printing class. They would not clean the tape. They had this. We had high school of printing. You had the shop classes, and so one of the shop classes I had was printing, and they had these big metal tables, and you weren't allowed to use solvent on them to clean them. After the end of the day, you had to clean them with oil.
Right, to protect the wood table, yeah.
To protect the table, but even the metal tables.
Oh, really? Yeah, that would keep them from rusting. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had to do them in oil, and so I'm thinking, let me start doing oil, and I started looking into it, and I saw, there's some, some people were talking about walnut oil, and so I got walnut oil at first, which is great, right, for it, but the walnut oil takes too long to dry.
Yeah, it takes a
Right. Long time to dry. And then I started using the linseed oil to clean my brushes, and I haven't looked back. Now, one of the things that happened was I had to change up my approach, and that was the killer, right?
Right. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well,
I'm pretty interested in that.
well, that was really the hard part, right? Because I had been used to 40 years, of painting, where I'm splashing on the underpainting with, like with solvent as if it's watercolor.
Right, using like a liquid and drawing it in. And
Just look, yeah, but really thinning it out with the solvent as if it's watercolor.
right.
'Cause I don't draw with a pencil or anything. Nowadays, now with my new tech, with this new way, sometimes I use charcoal, and I'll talk about that in a second. But, um, you know, now what do? You can't do these big splashy block-ins, underpainting. You know what I mean? Um, which are impressive. Like they make a painting look impressive right away, right? These you splash the paint around and then you begin to render an area and you could stop at any point and it looks beautiful, right? I
Mhm.
sort of give up on that, not really, but then I saw some of um, one of the things that changed my mind. There was a show at the Whitney called the Unfinished Show, and it had old master paintings starting at the Renaissance all the way through to the abstract expressionists, right? Unfinished paintings, of like Leonardo's unfinished painting, Rembrandt unfinished painting, remember? And I saw that they're blocking in before the 19th century. They're blocking in with a dry brush. They're doing it with a dry brush, right? The abstract expressionists, their unfinished painting was a blank canvas. I kid you not. There was a blank
Right.
canvas on the wall. They called it an unfinished painting. I digress. But
Painting two polar bears in a snowstorm, right?
you know what I'm saying? And so, but I noticed it, and I'm like, oh, let me try. So I went home and I started doing the paint as it comes out of the tube, as off my palette,
Mhm.
blocking in using a dry brush approach, and that works really well. But
So
you
that's
have,
your lean right out of the tube
yeah,
with a dry brush technique. That's your lean and the fat over lean technique with oil paint.
yeah. The side effect is that the painting is much more stable, right? Because
Mhm.
turpentine and solvents, they
Kills
change
the
the makeup, they change the chemical makeup of the paint.
It shatters that molecular structure.
That's right. But this, it's fat over lean. It's dry brush. So one of the unless you use a really good oil priming, if it's really well oil primed, you
Mhm.
can change things with a rag, right? But otherwise, I use acrylic prime, um, um, canvases, right? You have to be really careful about your drawing. And that's another good side effect of it. I couldn't just throw away the open. I couldn't just sort of like scribble in, the block and then sort of push it this way and push it around this way, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
I had to change up to really make every stroke count in the beginning because you can't erase, right? And that has been great because it helps us discipline. It also makes the painting go faster. And so that for that first pass is all dry brush. Now, one of the things that I do when I have a more complex composition and I want the design to be very specific, and I want the people to be very specific, and it's something that I got out of the book, the Solomon J. Solomon book, painting book, um, is to use the vine charcoal. So I'll block it in with the vine charcoal, still doing the same way, just still being very careful with the strokes that I put down. But the beautiful thing about the vine charcoal is you just take your rag and you can wipe it off and make corrections. So you can make the corrections with the vine charcoal. And then, as Solomon suggests, when that's done, I take a big chip brush and I just sort of lightly brush it off, leaving a ghost of the charcoal image on there. And then I come in with paint and then I retrace the lines that are ghosted. And that's my first pass. And that first pass is just the light and the dark in a dry brush. And then I put the dead layer color, the color, the layer after that, which just has the local color and the light and the dark and big planes. The dead layer is also done dry brush, and it ends up now. I really like the. At first, I was disappointed, but now I really like the way it looks, because now I'm being more accurate and more careful. If I'm not accurate or careful, it can look really ugly at that stage.
Mhm.
But then when that's done, then I just go in and I just work it out, and I use however much linseed oil that I need for the third layers.
Okay.
And it's wonderful. I mean, it's a great way of working. It's what they did. It's what they did
Right.
before.
It's how the old masters painted
Yeah,
before
and
they got solvents.
and it's made me more. It's made me more take more care with the initial accuracy, right, and to really know exactly what I want, right. And then that led to another discovery, you- um, that Rembrandt and Velasquez, they didn't wash their brushes, right?
Right. And
They
that
didn't
that
have running water. They didn't have running water, right? They didn't wash their brushes.
so what did
And
they do?
so
How
it,
do you clean your
so
brush?
I came across a picture of Rembrandt's studio. Um, and he had this little um thing that looks kind of like a paint roller tray, right? It's
Okay.
got a well and
Mhm.
then a slant, and the brushes are just laid in there up to the oil, up to the ferrule, into the linseed oil.
So the tips of the brushes are just sitting in linseed oil, and that linseed oil pulls the
Yes,
paint out of them.
up to the metal. Not only does it pull, but it doesn't let the paint dry on the brushes,
Right.
right? And so he's got a little well where you swish your brushes with the linseed oil, wipe them down, and then you lay them there for the night,
Mhm.
right?
So
And
no detergent, soap
no
involved at
detergent
all.
and
I know
soap involved.
a lot of artists will use, and I have in the past, using Murphy's oil soap
Yeah, Murphy's oil soap is wonderful.
between, because it's
Yeah,
got the soap, but it's got the linseed oil in it that really clean, and they do clean your brushes really well.
they do.
You're saying remove the soap part of it completely
Yeah,
and just use the oil.
and I just leave it there, right? So what I do is I rigged up a paint roller tray thing, but I made my own out of a cook. The first one I did was a paint roller tray, and then I found that from the cooking section in the supermarket, a baking pan with the little grid, the metal grid,
Mhm.
and with a little block on one side that lifts it up so that it's at an angle, works better for me.
Oh, okay, okay. I've seen some people have they've got a little bucket,
Yeah,
and then they have this rig on top with
yeah,
springs, and they put the brushes in the springs, and the brushes stand this
yeah,
way
yeah.
and they're floating in the oil a little
I
bit like.
I started doing that at first, right? And
Mhm.
that spring doesn't work with the big brushes. So I
Right.
made my own thing where I had a piece of wood and then I nailed
Clothespins.
cloth pins to it, right?
Mhm.
However, you know, this works better. The cloth it started, when I use a lot of brushes, it takes like you finish and it takes forever to put them all in. Not forever, it's a lot less than washing. I mean, your
Right,
brushes, but whereas I can just take them, swish them, and lie them down, and I'm done, right? Which has
right.
been amazing for my work because I have kids, right? So before I had to really plan how I was going to wash my brushes. I had to put that
Mhm.
in, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm going to finish at 2, so I guess I got to stop at 1:30, and wash my brushes, right? Or else
Right. Yeah, a lot of people don't, realize when you talk about cleaning your brushes with oil painting, and actually it's even worse with acrylic art because
yep,
when you're acrylic painting, that's plastic.
yeah, that's
Paint is
plastic.
plastic. So if any paint dries on your brush,
It's
you
dead.
kiss it goodbye, you
Well,
know?
I,
And so with oils, you gotta take an exorbitant amount of time and just cleaning up
to
after.
really, and you have to really get in the ferrule, otherwise they begin to spread out, right?
Right.
If you watch, but the side effect, I mean, what's been great is that if I have to finish at 2 o'clock, I finish at 2 o'clock. I just take them, and if I'm in a hurry, I just dump them in. I don't even bother swishing them, and then I swish them later. You know, once in a while, I'll take them out, like once a month maybe, and then I'll sit down if I have time and just take an hour and wash whatever brushes I use
Right.
and really wash them up. But
Give them a good.
what's been great about since I've discovered this, is that my brushes last forever. They last like 4 times as long. They last so long that the writing comes off the side of the brushes is
All
worn
right.
out before the brushes, and they stay, and it conditions them and they stay perfect. They don't
Right.
splay. You
Basically,
know,
you're letting them sit in hair conditioner all day.
that's right. I mean, it's wonderful. And it's great. And because I'm not using solvents, I just wipe them off. And so I get the cheaper for that truck for that. I always look for deals. I get the cheaper linseed oil. Usually, Dick Blick, or something. I'll get the cheap, inexpensive linseed oil
You
for
got a lot
putting.
of it to fill in that
Yeah,
tank.
but
Yeah.
but but you don't have to change it that often, because what happens is you just have to keep pouring it in. What happens is when you take that's the drawback. The drawback is you take out your brushes and it's a mess. So I have to keep paper towels nearby, so that when
Mhm.
I take out my brushes, I just soak them in. But what happens is every time you take out your brushes, you're pulling oil
Right, a little bit of
out of the
oil. Yeah.
thing.
So you got to
So,
replenish it every now and then.
so you never have to. Well, you never have to replenish it. You just add to it. You
Right.
never have to dump it out. You know. Now,
Nice.
now walnut oil is better, right, for this,
For that part.
for that part, because it's lighter in weight, right? So
Right.
the sediment sinks really well to the bottom.
Okay.
Really,
Cleaning your brush with
however,
walnut oil would be the way to go. As
except that
opposed
it's much more expensive.
right, it
Walnut oil
is.
is really expensive, and
Mhm.
also, walnut oil makes the painting take too long to dry. So
Right.
I do the so for a while I was using the safflower oil, but the
Mhm.
safflower oil has the same problem, and the safflower oil has a whereas as the walnut oil does dry properly, the safflower oil does not. So
Right.
I just like to use the linseed oil, but it's been the most wonderful thing for me. I don't get sick. I can paint for hours. I don't use any solvents except for when I make my varnish.
Right. So
Once
because you're gonna, so you make your own varnish.
I make my own varnish,
Okay. Yeah. And so that's the only time you'll need to have the turpentine then.
the solvent, yeah, and I use the really highly refined mineral spirits for that.
Okay.
And but that's it takes a second to pour the mineral spirits into the thing, and then you cap it up, shake it up, and then leave it overnight. You know what I mean? So it doesn't affect me.
Right. So that's good. So health wise, then this has been a game changer for you.
Game changer. I'm not sick anymore after painting. I mean, I got to tell you how terrible I felt. I would feel just 3 hours of painting, and I was bowled over. I couldn't do it.
Mm.
And
Did you ever like go to a doctor about it, or did you just figure it out on your own that it was the solvents?
I figured out it was the solvent on my own. And at that time I was so poisoned by the solvent that even the littlest bit would do it to me. So like for a little while there, I was using when I first stopped using the solvent, I was using Neil McGilp,
Mm.
to get, which is nice. It's kind of like Marigé, which I used to use. I used to make my own. Imagine how poisonous that was. You cook the lead. I used to make
You're right.
my own when I was in college. Thinking about how poison. Who knows? Maybe I might be smarter today if I hadn't cooked my own Marigé in college, right? But but the wonderful thing that I always liked about Marigé is that you can use it the whole way through, right? You can use it blocking in all the way through to the final layer, you know. And Neil McGilp had that, but Neil McGilp has solvent in it, and so like I would use a little bit of Neil, and I would get sick,
Mm.
and so I put that aside, and now I do it this, which I like much better than because it's purer. The only things now there's no crazy mixtures that go into my paintings, right? It's
It's
linseed
just,
oil. There's no
it's just
salt.
linseed oil, right? Which is
Linseed oil.
it is,
Yeah,
I mean, that
it's Rembrandt. It's linseed oil or stand oil, right? So I use either linseed oil or stand oil. And sometimes what Velasquez did and what Rembrandt did, with like I'll mix, if I have to do a really really thin glaze, the linseed oil is not, on its own, if it's not good, right? Because it needs particles in it in order
right.
to be strong. Otherwise, it begins to fold up later on. It needs particles. It needs like rocks. It's like you think about cement needs little rocks in it
Mhm.
to make it strong. And so what Rembrandt did, is when he had to do thin glazes, he mixed ground lead glass
Hmm.
to to make it particle, so that way you can have a thin glaze, right? And so I bought ground lead glass, and that's what I do. I mix, if I need to make a thin glaze. Of course, you can use gels. Some of the gels are
Right,
really
the
good too.
oleo gel, different things,
Oleo
yeah.
gel and that stuff like that, works well as well. But I feel old school. I put the glass in and I mix it in. You can also use chalk and make a more transparent white, that extends, so they
Mm.
call it Velasquez white. White. Now you can take the chalk and mix it in with the linseed oil, and and it becomes like this sort of.
Yeah,
So they call it Velasquez white. It's as
yeah,
if you're making the paint,
translucent white, yeah.
but it's very transparent. and it extends and it's really nice. So that's the only things that I do sometimes. You know, if I'm gonna do like an impasto, if I want a nice stringy white, you know what I mean, I'll mix the chalk in. You know, if I want a nice thin glaze, some adjustment glaze, I put in some of the glass, the ground glass.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
And it allows you to make a thin glaze that's still gonna hold up and strong.
Right. So that's pretty. That I mean that's I mean it's hearing the journey from the thing you love is starting to kill you basically. And how that must mentally as an artist. Here's this thing that you know this is the thing you live for. This is how you make your career. But it's for an artist, it's not just making your career out of it. This is like it's like
Well, yeah.
oxygen you breathe in a lot of ways.
It's what you would do no matter, even if you couldn't make a living at it.
Right. It's like, exactly. And then all of a sudden, this thing, for whatever reason, the way your body's reacting to the solvents was making it where you either have to stop doing it,
yeah,
or change the way you do it, or change the medium that you use. Acrylic, of course, my friend Nancy Rayner, who is like the guru of acrylic paint, will probably tell you just go to acrylic. But you would love her. She's fantastic. But she's written like, for me, the Bibles of acrylic.
Wow.
Like she's written like five books on everything you need to know about acrylic paint. She's like the Virgil Elliott of acrylic paint.
That's wonderful.
That's really what I would say to her. So she would probably want to have a totally different conversation with you. But it's like you had to make a choice.
Yeah.
You decided to, and you figured out a way to go solvent-free, and it's working for you. And I'm in a very similar situation where, I mean, I'm at the point where the solvents don't really bother me, but I do know that my new studio here is an enclosed garage with no ventilation at all unless I open the door. And so I need to go solvent-free. And so listening to you and what you're saying is like, okay, it's time for me to start doing these things.
The crazy thing is that I had to make this change, and though at the learning curve, of learning to paint with more dry brush at first is very discouraging because it takes a while before the painting looks good. You know what I mean?
Right.
But in the end, now where I am now is much better than I was before. It's happier painting. I really like it because it really have to be disciplined. You know what I mean? And it ended up being a major change where I thought it was going to be a negative. It's for the better. I have more time. And then on top of that, I have a 6-year-old who comes in and paints with me. He's
make sure that air is.
Yeah, he has an easel and it's set up in a studio right next to mine, right
next to Dad.
Right next to Dad. So I also owe it to him to go solvent-free. And I feel because oil paint on its own is not toxic. It's not any more toxic than acrylic. In fact, it's debatable which is more toxic, right?
Yeah, no kidding. If you're going with linseed oil, oil paint solvent-free compared to plastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you hear my lawn care guy is going crazy out right outside the door. So, but yeah, it's like you're being, it's solvent-free equals good parenting.
That's right.
So there you go. So, well, on that note, we've been talking for, oh my gosh, we're going on 98 minutes. I am so blown. I've had so much fun.
Me too.
This has been fantastic. So thank you very much, Ricky. I am so, guys, check out his website. We've had it online. I'm going to put it up here one more time so you guys can see it. There it is right there. And so, Ricky, thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it. And so with that said, we're going to do our little housekeeping stuff here. But again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.
And guys, again,
check everybody
him out. It's going to be fantastic. You're going to love it and learn a lot. He's got a blog too on his website talking about going solvent-free in more detail with some pictures. So check that out on his site. And so, Ricky, we will talk with you soon.
Take care.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for coming on. Hey, with that said, do me a favor. If you're watching this on Facebook Live, or if you're just watching it on Facebook after it's aired, be sure to hit the share button and share this on your page so people can learn about it. We went really long on this one, but man, what a good conversation. We talked about all kinds of things, about finding your artistic voice, making sure you have a cohesive portfolio, talking about, you know, the way genres change and how you kind of have to adjust the way you're working throughout your career as an artist. You know, Ricky started off doing, you know, illustrations and romance novels and things like that, and then transitioning, you know, now where he's a fine artist in galleries and different things like that. So it's changing. We've talked about him going solvent-free. That's a huge one. That's a game changer, and that's something that me personally, that I'm really making a conscious effort to get that way in my art as well. So guys, this was an incredible video. I'm so excited. Share it for me. Also, if you're watching this on Facebook, go to the Gagnon Atelier right down here, right there, the Gagnon Atelier Facebook page. Hit the like button. Invite your friends to it. I would really appreciate that. Remember, we also have a Gagnon Atelier YouTube channel, which this video and the other videos that have been on Facebook, we're going to be transitioning those over to our YouTube channel as well. So you can watch Ricky and Anna Rose Bain and David Kassan and Shannon Levinson and other interviews that we've done, Paul Brent, Matthew Tommy, all the other artists that we've interviewed. We're going to be putting their videos also on YouTube as well. So remember, Gagnon Atelier on Facebook, Gagnon Atelier on YouTube. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, and share. And Joe, the lawn care guy, is loving his life out there, mowing our lawn and making it pretty. But with that said, guys, thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to put our graphic on here, and we're going to put that on the solo mode once I figure out how to do it. Thank you very much, guys. Remember, God loves you, and so does your old pal, Tim.